"Get out and walk, old man." That is what my son-in-law said to me on a black mountain road in the middle of a thunderstorm, right after he stopped his SUV, came around to my door, dragged me out into the pouring rain, and threw my crutches down into the mud in the ditch on the side of the road. I am 71 years old. I'd had my knee replaced 3 weeks before that night. I could not walk 10 feet without those crutches, and he knew it. He knew it better than anybody, because he'd watched me struggle around the house on them for 3 weeks. And he took them, and he threw them into a ditch full of cold running water, and he turned to me with the rain coming down both our faces, and he sneered, "Get out and walk." And then, from inside the car, from the passenger seat, I heard my own daughter laugh. And I need you to understand, it was not a nervous laugh. It was not a, "This has gone too far, honey, stop it" laugh. She laughed the way a person laughs at something they genuinely find funny. And then she leaned across the seat toward the open door, my little girl, the baby I had held in my 2 arms in the hospital 40 years before, the child I had raised, and she said, "Bye, Dad. Go meet a grizzly bear. You're an embarrassment to us." And she was still smiling when her husband slammed my door shut, and the 2 of them drove off and left me standing there in the dark and the rain on the side of a mountain, 3 weeks out of surgery, with my crutches washing away down a ditch. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I have had to sit with it every day since. But here is the thing that the 2 of them did not know, as they drove off, laughing, into the storm. When they finally got back to that house a couple of hours later, I was already inside, dry, sitting in my own chair, in my own living room, with the lights on, waiting for them. And when they walked in through that door and saw me sitting there, and the color drained right out of both their faces, I smiled at them, and I said, "I have a surprise for you." But I am getting way ahead of myself, and this whole story doesn't mean a single thing to you unless I tell it to you in the right order, because you need to understand how a 71-year-old man on crutches got himself off of that mountain and beat them home, and who it was that came around the bend and stopped on that road in the middle of the storm, and what my surprise actually turned out to be. And I promise you right now, it is not the thing they were so afraid it was, and it is not the thing you are expecting either. So stay with me. And if you have ever been treated like a burden by the very people that you gave your whole entire life to, then reach down and hit that subscribe button right now before we go one step further. Because this is a story about what a man is truly worth on the day the people who are supposed to love him the most decide that he is worth nothing at all. And I promise you, the part where the 2 of them walk back through that door is worth every second of the wait. Let me back up. My name is Cormac Delaney. Just about everybody who knows me calls me Mac. I'm 71 years old. And when I was a young man, 18 years old, and about as dumb as a fence post, the way most 18-year-old boys are, I joined the United States Army. And I want to be very clear about this right up front because it matters later on in this story. And I do not want you sitting there thinking that I am something that I am not. I was not a hero. I was not in the Special Forces. I was not some elite operator. I did not come home with a chest full of medals and a drawer full of commendations. I was an ordinary soldier who did his ordinary job during his years of service and who came home in one piece, which, I will tell you, is more than some of the men I served alongside got to do. After I got out of the Army, I went to work, like everybody does. I was a land surveyor for the better part of 40 years, out in every kind of weather, up and down this whole part of the country with a transit and a measuring rod and a pair of muddy boots, doing good, honest, physical work that slowly wore my knees down to absolutely nothing, which is exactly how I came to need one of them replaced at the age of 71. Along the way, I married a wonderful woman, the best woman I ever knew, named Margie, and the 2 of us had 1 daughter. And I lived a completely ordinary, unremarkable life, and I was deeply proud of every bit of it. But those years I spent in the Army, when I was young, they gave me one thing that turned out to matter more, in the end, than I could ever possibly have known at the time. They gave me a man named Gideon Rourke. I want you to hold on to that name and tuck it away for later. Gideon Rourke. Because he is the entire reason that I am sitting here today, alive, able to tell you any of this at all. But let me tell you about my daughter first, because she is the one that this story is really, truly about, and she is the one who has broken my heart in a way I did not know a heart could break at 71. Her name is Adrienne. She was born in the year 1986, when I was 32 years old, and Margie and I had waited a long, long time for her to come along. And when she finally did, that little girl became our entire world, the both of us. And I was a good father to her. And I am not just saying that to make myself look good in front of you, I mean it as a plain fact. I coached her softball teams. I taught her how to drive a car on the back roads outside of town, gripping the door handle and trying not to holler. I walked her down the aisle at her wedding in a suit I bought special. I paid for a wedding that, truth be told, I could not really afford, because I wanted my little girl to have the exact day she had dreamed about since she was small. I was there. For every single day of that child's growing up, I was there. And whatever went so terribly wrong in the years after, no person on this earth can ever tell me that I was not there for her, because I was, all the way through. But somewhere along the way, Adrienne changed, and I have spent a great many long and sleepless nights since, trying to put my finger on exactly when it happened, and exactly how, and I still do not entirely know. Some of it, I think, was just who she slowly became as she grew into a woman. She got hungry, somewhere in there, for a certain kind of life, a certain kind of status, nice things, and the right address in the right neighborhood, and being seen in the right places with the right sort of people. My Margie used to worry about it, out loud, in the quiet of our kitchen at night. "That girl measures everything by what it costs, Mac," she'd say to me, shaking her head. And I would tell her that it was just a phase, that Adrienne would grow out of it, that she had a good heart underneath it all. And I want to tell you as honestly as I can, it was not a phase, and I was wrong. And then Adrienne went and married Trevor Lund, my son-in-law. And I will be honest with you. I disliked the man from about the third time I ever met him, and I kept my mouth shut about it for years and years, because a father who badmouths his daughter's husband is a father who ends up losing his daughter. Trevor was one of those men who is all surface, and nothing underneath. A firm, practiced handshake, and an expensive watch on his wrist that I suspect he couldn't really afford, and absolutely nothing down beneath all of it except pure, simple wanting. He wanted things. He wanted the big lifestyle, and he wanted it right now, today, and what he very much did not want was to do the long, slow, unglamorous work of actually earning it. And I noticed, over the years, that whenever Trevor looked at me, I could all but see the man doing arithmetic behind his eyes. I could see him looking at a lonely old widower with a paid-off house and a decent retirement account, and quietly running the numbers. Here is the thing that I did not understand for far too long, to my own shame. Trevor and Adrienne were in trouble. Real financial trouble. The two of them lived enormously beyond what they actually brought in, the way that people always do when they care a great deal more about looking rich than they do about actually being rich. And then, about 2 years ago, my Margie passed away. Cancer. God rest that good woman. More than 40 years of the finest marriage a man could ask for, gone in just 8 months from her diagnosis to the day I buried her. And I was destroyed by it. I was grieving with my whole body, and I was suddenly terribly alone in a house that had her fingerprints on everything. And it was right then, right into that open wound, that Adrienne and Trevor came to me with a plan. And the plan, I have to admit, sounded exactly like love. They told me that I shouldn't be all alone in that big house, rattling around in it by myself at my age. They told me that I should let them move in with me, or, even better, that I should let them help me manage all my affairs, put a few of my accounts into both of our names, just for convenience's sake, and let Trevor help out with the finances, seeing as how I was getting on in years and it was all getting to be a lot for one old man to keep track of. And I was so lonely and so deep in my grief, and she was my daughter, my own flesh and blood, and God help me, I wanted so badly to believe that it was love. So I let them in. Not all the way, and I want to be honest with you about that because it matters enormously later on. Some old quiet instinct way down in my gut stopped me from ever signing everything over to them entirely. But I let them into my house, and I let them into my life, and I let them, part way at least, into my money. And it was never, ever love. I understand that completely now, though it cost me nearly my life to learn it. It was a hostile takeover, cold and calculated, that had simply put on the warm and smiling face of a devoted daughter. Because the very moment that the two of them were in, the contempt began. Slowly, at first, the way these things always start. Little offhand comments about how much I ate at dinner, about how slow I was getting around, about how I just didn't understand the modern world and modern things anymore. And then it got bigger. They started talking about me as though I wasn't even sitting right there in the room with them. Trevor started making decisions about my house and about my money, without so much as asking me first. And my Adrian, my own Adrian, started looking at me with an expression that I had never once in my life seen on my little girl's face before. Embarrassment, like I was a stain on the carpet. Like the very same father who had walked her down that aisle had somehow curdled into something that she now had to constantly apologize for, and explain away and be ashamed of. And then, on top of everything else, I needed to have my knee replaced. The surgery itself went just fine. But recovery from a thing like that, at 71 years of age, is a slow and grinding business. And for a good few weeks afterward I was laid up on crutches, and I needed help. Just help getting around the house, help with the ordinary daily things, the completely normal help that any single human being on earth needs after somebody saws their knee open and puts a new one in. And that, as it turned out, was the final straw for the both of them. Because now I was not merely an embarrassment to be endured. Now I had become actual work. Now I was a genuine burden, a thing that required real, daily, inconvenient effort on their part. And Trevor and Adrian, I would very soon come to learn, had already quietly decided among themselves exactly what they were going to do about their burden. They had decided to put me away in a home. Now, I want to be very careful and very fair here, because there is not one single thing wrong with a good care facility. Some folks genuinely need that level of care, and there is not 1 ounce of shame in it, and I would never say otherwise to anybody. But I need you to understand that that is not what this was. This was not 2 loving children carefully finding their aging father the level of care that he truly needed. I did not need a nursing home, not even close. What I needed was a few weeks of a little help while my new knee finished healing up, after which I would be walking around just fine, living completely independently, exactly the way I had been doing perfectly well before. What this actually was, underneath the pretty words, was Trevor and Adrian coldly deciding to warehouse me somewhere far away and somewhere cheap to get me out of the house. My house. So that the two of them could finally have it, and have my money along with it, without the ongoing inconvenience of me still being alive and living inside of it. They had already gone and found a place. Way out, clear on the far side of the mountains, a good couple of hours' drive away from everything and everyone I knew. And they had not asked me about any of it. They had simply informed me that it was happening. And when I objected, when I planted my feet and said no, absolutely not, this is my home and I am not going anywhere, Trevor just smiled that smooth smile of his and said, "It's already decided, Mac." And that, right there, is how I came to be sitting in the back seat of Trevor Lund's SUV on a stormy night, being driven completely against my own will over a lonely, isolated mountain road, toward a facility that I had never once agreed to set foot in, so that my daughter and her husband could take my house right out from under me. And I was angry, and I was frightened, and I was heartbroken, all at the same time, and somewhere out on that dark mountain road, in the middle of the pouring rain, I said so, out loud. I told them that I was not going. I told them to turn the car around and take me home. And then I told Adrienne that her mother, if she could see this, would be ashamed of what she'd become, and that, the moment I brought up Margie, that is the thing that set Trevor off. He pulled the SUV over hard, swerving onto the gravel shoulder of the road in the driving rain. And for 1 second I honestly thought that maybe he was just going to turn around and yell at me, or maybe actually turn the car around. Instead, he threw his door open, and he came stalking around the front of the vehicle to my side, and he wrenched my door open and he physically hauled me up and out of that back seat and out into the rain. And there was nothing I could do to stop him. I am 71 years old and 3 weeks out of major surgery, and he is 42 and strong as a bull. He shoved me back against the wet side of the car to prop me up, and then he reached back into the vehicle and grabbed my crutches, both of them, and he turned and hurled them down into the ditch, into the running water. And then he looked at me, with the cold rain absolutely pouring down over both of our faces, and he said, "Get out and walk, old man." And my daughter laughed and leaned over and told me to go and meet a grizzly bear and called me an embarrassment to them. And then the two of them climbed back into that warm, dry car and they drove away, and I stood there and watched their red taillights disappear around a curve in the mountain, and then I was completely alone in the dark. I want to try to tell you what that was actually like, standing there in that moment. And the strange thing is, at first, it was not even the fear of it, though, believe me, the fear came soon enough. The very first thing, the thing that went straight through the center of me like a blade, was the sound of my daughter's laugh. That is the thing I could not get past. Not the very real possibility that I was about to die out there on that mountain. That horror came a minute or two later, but that my little girl, the baby I had rocked to sleep, the child whose skinned knees I had bandaged, had laughed at me, had found it funny. That is a very specific and a very deep kind of wound, and I truly hope that most of you watching this never, ever have to feel it for yourselves. And then, right on schedule, the fear did come, because it absolutely should have. Because I was standing on an isolated mountain road, in the pitch black, in the middle of a thunderstorm, 71 years old, and 3 weeks out from having my knee rebuilt, and my only means of walking was gone. My crutches were down in a ditch full of fast-moving water that was busily carrying them off into the dark. I lowered myself down, carefully and in a whole lot of pain, on a brand-new knee that screamed bloody murder at me the whole way down, and I stretched out and I tried to reach them and I could not, and I watched helplessly as the current pulled them the rest of the way out of my reach and off into the blackness. And in that moment I understood, with total clarity, that I was in very real and very serious trouble. A man in my condition does not simply get up and walk out of a situation like that. A man in my condition, in that cold and that wet, on the side of a mountain, might very well not last the whole night through. And I want to be clear, that is not me being dramatic for the sake of a good story. That is just the plain and simple truth of what exposure and a bad knee will do to an old man on a mountain in a storm. So I did the only thing that there was left for me to do. I dragged myself back up onto the surface of the road, and I started trying to move along it, hauling my own body forward inch by painful inch, and hoping, just desperately hoping, and maybe praying a little, that some car, any car at all, might happen to come along. But on a road like that one, at that hour of the night, in a storm like that, it was the very thinnest kind of hope. Because almost nobody ever comes down a road like that. But somebody came. I saw the headlights first, coming slow, easing carefully around the curve up ahead of me, an old pickup truck, picking its way down the wet and treacherous mountain road. And I did the only thing that I possibly could. I hauled myself up as tall and as visible as I could manage, right out where they'd see me, and I waved both my arms over my head, this soaked and shaking old man standing in the middle of a mountain road in the dark, praying with everything I had that they would stop, and that they would not take one look at me and think I was something to be afraid of and drive right on past. And the truck slowed down, and it stopped, and a man climbed out of it. An older man, he had to be pushing 80 years old, but he was solid, and he moved with a particular kind of unhurried steadiness that some men just never lose no matter how old they get. And he came toward me through the sheeting rain and he called out, "Easy now, easy. I've got you. What in the world are you doing all the way out here, friend?" And then he got close enough to really see my face, there in the glow of his own headlights. And he stopped dead in his tracks, and he said, "Delaney?" Because I knew that voice. Even after damn near 50 whole years, even soaked to the bone and half frozen and terrified on the side of a mountain, I knew that voice the instant I heard it. It was Gideon Rourke. Let me tell you exactly who Gideon Rourke is. When I was a 19-year-old private in the Army, dumb and scared, and a very long way from everything I'd ever known, Gideon Rourke was my commanding officer. He was a young officer himself back then, not a whole lot older than the rest of us, but he was the man who was in charge of us, and he was the particular kind of officer who actually and genuinely looked after his men. He knew every single one of our names. He knew what little town each of us was from. He made it his personal business to make sure that every one of his people was taken care of. There is a thing that gets said in the military, and the different branches all say it in their own different ways. But when you boil it all down, it comes to just this. You do not leave your people behind. Not ever. You do not leave anybody behind. And Gideon Rourke was the man who taught me, all those years ago, what those words actually meant. Not as some slogan you shout, but as an actual way of moving through the world, a way of being a man. I served under Gideon Rourke for a couple of years, half a century ago now, and then life carried the two of us off in completely different directions, the way that it always does, and I had not laid eyes on the man in decades upon decades. And it turned out, and I promise you, this is the part that still raises the hair on my arms every time I think about it. It turned out that Gideon had retired up into these very mountains, years and years back. Had himself a little place, tucked up in the hills, and that road, that dark, isolated, God-forsaken road where my own son-in-law had thrown me out into the storm to die, that was a road that Gideon Rourke drove all the time because it was simply the way to his home. He was on his way back from town that very night, in the middle of that storm, on a stretch of road that he knew like the back of his own weathered hand. And what he found on it was one of his own soldiers, 50 years later, freezing to death down in the mud. I very nearly came completely apart when I realized who it was standing there in front of me. And Gideon, 78 years old and not a big man anymore, not by a long shot, Gideon got himself right down into that mud with me, and he got his own shoulder up underneath my arm, and he all but carried me bodily to his truck, and he got me up inside of it, and he cranked that heater all the way up, and he pulled an old wool blanket out from behind the seat and wrapped it around my shoulders, and the entire time he kept saying to me, low and steady, "I've got you, Delaney. I've got you now. You're all right. You're going to be all right." Exactly as if 50 long years had not passed by at all. Exactly as if he were still the young officer whose solemn responsibility it was to get every last one of his men home safe and sound. And there, in that warm truck cab, shaking like a leaf, I told him everything. All of it. My daughter, her husband, the home the two of them were forcing me into against my will, the crutches in the ditch, and the laugh. And I watched Gideon Rourke's face change, slowly, from open concern into something a great deal harder, and a great deal quieter, and a great deal more dangerous. And when I finally finished telling it all, he sat silent for a long moment, just staring out through the rain-streaked windshield. And then he turned to me and he said, "Where do you live, Mac? Not the home they're dumping you in. Your house? Your actual home. I am taking you home right now." And that, right there, is exactly how a 71-year-old man on crutches managed to beat the two of them back to that house. Because Gideon Rourke drove me straight there, without stopping, the whole way, and Trevor and Adrienne, well, they did not go straight home. Oh no, not those two. I would find out only a little later that the two of them had actually stopped, on their leisurely drive back from leaving me for dead on a mountainside. They had stopped at a restaurant, to sit down and have themselves a nice dinner, to celebrate, I can only imagine, finally being rid of the great burden of me. The two of them sat down and enjoyed a nice meal together while I was supposed to be out there dying in the freezing rain. And so, while the two of them were sitting there looking over their menus, Gideon Rourke was driving me home and helping me up the walk and getting me inside and settled into my own chair. And so, by the time their headlights finally came swinging into my driveway a full couple of hours later, I was dry and I was warm, and I was sitting in my own chair in my own living room with all the lights on, waiting for them. But I was not just sitting there waiting with the speech all worked up in my head. Let me tell you exactly what I did during those 2 hours, because this is where my surprise actually came from, and I promise you it was not the thing that they were so afraid of. When Gideon got me home and got me settled in, the very first thing I did was pick up the phone and call the sheriff. Because here is a thing that Trevor Lund, in all his sneering contempt, had never once stopped to consider. What he had just done was a crime, Taking a disabled man, 3 weeks out of major surgery, and abandoning him out on an isolated mountain road in the middle of a thunderstorm, with no way to walk, that is not some private family disagreement. That is reckless endangerment. And in a great many places it has an even more specific name than that, because there are laws written down precisely to protect vulnerable and at-risk adults from being abandoned and endangered exactly like this. What that man did could very easily have killed me. He left me out there to die, and he did it in a way that the law takes extremely seriously. And I had a witness. I had Gideon Rourke, who had found me down in the mud in the exact spot where the two of them had left me, and I had my own account of it all, clear and detailed and steady. So I called up the sheriff's department and I reported the whole thing, and they told me a deputy was already on his way out to me. The second thing that I did was call up my lawyer that very same night and leave him a message that I needed to see him first thing the following morning, to change my will completely, and to reverse and unwind every single financial arrangement that Trevor and Adrian had ever managed to worm their way into, because I had been a grieving old fool who had let the two of them get partway into my money, but, thank God, only partway, and I was about to slam that particular door shut for good and all. And the third thing that I did was simply sit there, in my chair, with Gideon Rourke sitting in the chair right across from me, because that old man had flatly refused to leave my side, said he wasn't going one single place until this entire thing was finished and settled. That same old no one gets left behind steel in him after all these years. And I waited for my daughter to come home. And after a while, I heard the SUV pull up outside. I heard their two voices, careless and light and easy, laughing about something between themselves as they came strolling up the front walk, still, celebrating, the both of them. And the front door swung open, and Trevor walked in first, and he saw me sitting there in my chair, and I watched the color drain straight out of his face like water running out of a pulled sink. And then Adrian came in through the door behind him, and she saw me too, and she made a small sound, a sharp little gasp, and she dropped her purse right onto the floor. Because you have to understand exactly what it was that the two of them were seeing in that moment. They had left me for dead out on a mountain 2 hours before. And now here I was, sitting calmly in my own chair, perfectly dry and perfectly composed, with a steady, silent old stranger sitting in the chair beside me. To the two of them, in that first frozen second, it must have looked like something close to impossible. It must have looked like they were staring at a ghost. And I smiled at the both of them, and I said, "I have a surprise for you." And Trevor immediately started talking fast, the words just tumbling out of him. "Mac, oh my God, Mac, we came back for you. We felt just terrible about it. We turned right around. We were on our way back to come get you." The lies just pouring out of the man like water, and I let him run all the way down, let him talk himself out. And then I said, very quietly, "Save it, Trevor. There is a sheriff's deputy on his way to this house right now. This here is Gideon Rourke. He found me down in the ditch where the two of you left me, about a minute, I'd reckon, before I would have been in very serious trouble indeed. And he is going to tell that deputy exactly what he found. And I am going to tell that deputy exactly what the two of you did. You took a disabled man and you left him to die on a mountain, Trevor. That is a crime, and you are not going to be able to talk your way out of this one." And I watched it land on him. I watched the full understanding of it settle over the man's face, the understanding that this was not some family squabble that he could smooth over with his slick words and his charm. And Adrienne began to cry, and I will be honest with you, for 1 second, for 1 single weak second, the father in me wanted to get up and comfort her, because that reflex does not ever fully die, not even when every part of you knows it should. But then I remembered the laugh, and I looked at my daughter, and I said to her the single hardest thing that I have ever had to say in the whole of my 71 years of life. I said, "You laughed, Adrienne. I was standing out there in the freezing rain, and you laughed at me, and you told me to go and die. And I have replayed the sound of that laugh in my head 100 times over in these last 2 hours, and I need you to know that I heard it. Your mother's own daughter laughed at her crippled old father and left him out there to die in a storm. I do not know who it is that you have become, but I know that I cannot pretend, not for one more day, that you are still the little girl that I raised." The deputy arrived a few minutes after that, and here is the honest, grounded truth of how that whole thing went, because I am not going to sell you some kind of a fantasy. Trevor was arrested that very night. What he had done, the abandonment of me, the reckless endangerment of an at-risk adult, with both a witness and a victim standing right there giving their statements, was serious, and it was chargeable, and they took him right out of my house that night in handcuffs, still talking the entire way, still spinning it, still explaining, the way that his particular kind of man always does right up until the very end. He would have to answer for what he did in a court of law, and in time he did. Adrienne was not arrested that night. She had not been the one driving the car, and she had not been the one to throw my crutches into the ditch. Her particular crime was of a different sort altogether, the kind that the law does not always quite manage to reach. The laughing kind, the leaving kind. But she did not simply walk away from it all untouched either, and I want to tell you the honest rest of that. Now, the rest of it. I changed my will the very next morning, exactly the way I had planned to. Every last arrangement that Trevor and Adrienne had managed to insinuate themselves into, I reversed and unwound with my lawyer's help. And it turned out, thank God, that the two of them had gotten a good deal less of a grip on my finances than they had been hoping for, thanks entirely to that old, quiet instinct that had stopped me from ever signing the whole of it over. And what little they had managed to get their hands on, I clawed right back. The house was mine, free and clear, and it stayed mine, and the two of them were out. Out of my will, out of my house, out of my accounts, out of all of it. Trevor, as I have told you, faced real charges for what he did that night, and I am not going to sit here and pretend to you that I felt any sorrow at all watching that happen to him. He was a man who would have let me freeze to death on a mountain for the sake of getting his hands on a house, and the law had a name for what he did, and he answered to that name. That is not revenge. That is just plain and simple consequences, finally catching up to a man who had spent his whole life believing that he was somehow above them. And Adrienne, my Adrienne. Well, the marriage did not survive it, in the end. It is a hard thing, it turns out, to stay married to a man who is facing criminal charges for trying to kill your own father, even for a woman like she had become. She reached out to me some months later. She wanted to talk. She wanted, I think, to try to explain herself, or maybe to apologize, or maybe just to find her way back toward my money if nothing else was left. And I will tell you honestly, to this very day, I genuinely do not know which of those it was, and I will tell you exactly what I did about it, and you can go ahead and judge me for it however you see fit. I met with her. One time. Because she is my daughter and she is Margie's daughter, and I felt that I had to. And I sat and I listened to her. And at the very end of it all, I told her the truth. I told her that I forgave her, because carrying around that much hatred and bitterness would only poison whatever years I have got left in this life, and I flatly refused to give her that power over me. But I also told her that forgiving her and trusting her again are two entirely different things, and that the door to my home and to my life was closed now, and it was going to stay closed. And I wished her well, and I meant it when I said it. And I have not laid eyes on her since that day, because some wounds, it turns out, you truly can forgive, without ever once having to pretend that they did not happen. And Gideon Rourke? Well, Gideon Rourke saved my life out on that mountain, and then he did not simply vanish right back into it, the way he might have. That old man became, in the time that I have had since that night, the closest and truest friend that I have got left in this world. It turns out that neither one of us had a whole lot of family left to speak of, and both of us had an awful lot of long years piled up behind us, and the two of us understood each other in the particular way that, I have come to believe, only two men who once wore the very same uniform a long, long time ago ever really can. We have coffee together twice a week, every week, without fail. He still calls me Delaney. And I have thought, more than a few times since, about the plain fact that of all the roads in all of these mountains, on the single worst night of my entire life, the one man who came easing around that curve in the pouring rain turned out to be the one man on the whole face of this earth who had spent his entire life believing, down in his bones, that you do not ever leave anybody behind, and who, a full 50 years later, proved that he still meant every word of it. I do not have a good word for what that is. Grace, maybe. That is as close as I can get to it. All I know for certain is that I would be lying dead on that mountain right now if not for it. Here is the one thing I keep coming back around to, over and over, and then I promise I will let you go. My son-in-law threw my crutches into a ditch and told me to get out and walk. My own daughter laughed at me and called me an embarrassment to her. The two of them looked at me, and what they saw was a burden, a thing that was in their way, a weak, useless old man who was worth precisely nothing to anybody. And they were so completely certain of that, so absolutely sure that I was worth nothing at all, that it never one time crossed either of their minds that a man is not worth nothing, just because his knees have finally given out on him, and he needs a little help getting around for a few weeks. That, the very same worthless old man they had just thrown down into the mud had, 50 years before, earned the fierce and lasting loyalty of someone who would, without a single second's hesitation, climb right down into that same mud to save his life. They measured my entire worth by what I happened to cost them, and they got the answer completely and utterly wrong, because that is simply not how you measure the true worth of a human being. It never once was. The people who are supposed to love you the most in all the world, they can decide that you have become a burden to them. They can throw you away, out in the cold and the rain, but they do not get to decide what you are actually, truly worth. That was never theirs to decide in the first place. It never ever was. So let me ask you something, and I really do read these. Have you ever been made to feel like a burden by the very same people that you gave absolutely everything to? A child, a family member, somebody that you would have laid down your own life for, who then turned around and decided one day that you had simply become too much trouble to be bothered with any longer? How did you carry that weight? I would truly like to hear about it, down in the comments, because I have come to believe that there are a great many more of us out here than anybody ever cares to admit. And tell me this one too. Do you have a Gideon Rourke somewhere in your own life? Somebody who showed up for you when nobody else in the world would. Somebody who proved to you that the bonds between people that actually and truly matter are not always the ones that we just happen to be born into. Tell me about them down below, because those, right there, are the people who are truly worth talking about. If this one meant something to you tonight, do me that one favor I asked you for at the very start, hit subscribe, and stay with me a while. There is another one coming, and it's a good one.